Hey there, Margie Bryce here, bringing you the Crabby Pastor podcast. And I don't think you're going to be too surprised to know that it's too easy today to become the Crabby Pastor. Our time together will give you food for thought to help you be the ministry leader, fully surrendered to God's purposes and living into whatever it takes to get you there and keep you there. So we're talking about sustainability in ministry. Okay, this episode of the Crabby Pastor podcast, we are going to talk to and speak to a different segment of the body of Christ that serves. And I think this is going to fit directly in with the broader ministry leaders that maybe are sitting on the sidelines for one reason or another. But I made this connection with Tonya Kucey. Did I say that correctly?
You're fairly close. It's Kucey.
Kucey, okay. And Tonya is, well, I'm going to let Tonya tell you who she is, but she has connections with people on the mission field. And that is a segment of ministry leader that it's not that we don't think they're ministry leaders, but it's just a little different. They're entrepreneurs for sure, of sorts. They have to build from the ground up their ministry, which is absolutely phenomenal and an amazing skill set to have been given, that the Lord has given to them. So, Tonya, can you then speak to us? Give us a sense of who you are and how you serve.
Well, it's great to be with you today and to get to share with you some of the things that the Lord is doing in the lives of us missionaries. My name is Tonya Kucey. I am an ordained elder in the Church of the Nazarene and have been for a number of years now. I've served in capacities of leadership in a number of areas, from local pastor to global missionary, and a number of other capacities in between those two ministry points. And recently, I have returned from the mission field. Initially, it was as a result of my husband's cancer, and then COVID came in within 3 weeks of my return from the mission field because of my husband's health. Then COVID hit, and certainly here in Canada, especially the eastern coast, which I'm from, there were some really significant restrictions on travel. And as you may know, on your side of the border, that our border, the first time, was closed. We weren't able to go back and forth in and out of Canada and the United States. And also the flights from Canada directly into Haiti, where I've been serving since 2011, was stopped. And so God, I literally could not leave within 20 kilometers of my house without facing the possibility of a $2,000 fine because we were in lockdown in a small radius here in this part of Canada. And so as a missionary, with a missionary call to serve cross-culturally, and in this case in a different country, that was very challenging to be a missionary and not be able to be on the mission field while dealing with a very sick husband, while being in lockdown with COVID, and yet having this call to serve in such a cross-cultural situation. And so it's been an adjustment, to say the least.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm kind of tagging this kind of a situation in a broader sense. I'm saying that it's sidelined in ministry. There are many missionaries, I'm told, that have not been able to return to the mission field. And so they are basically sidelined. And for the sake even of this conversation, there are people who are ministry leaders who are not serving in the local church capacity at this time because many churches' funding has declined. And that has meant that some staff have lost their positions, or churches may have closed and there are not as many positions available as well. So I want to talk to, in the broad sense here, even through the story of the missionaries, about what it means to be sidelined. And if you are of the Wesleyan branch of the Protestant realm, you will know Wesley's covenant prayer. And there was a line that always used to just freak me out because it said, "Let me be laid aside for thee." Oh, gee, what does that mean? And that does not sound like anything that you'd raise your hand and sign up for. Exactly. And it's a heartbreaker because during those periods, you kind of wonder, did I hear right? Maybe I didn't hear the call correctly. But anyway, we're going to go back to Tonya and talk to us about what many missionaries are experiencing.
Well, there's heartbreak and there's grief, and I'm not just sharing that from my own personal experience. It is the common conversation that I'm having with missionaries, not only from the field in which I have been serving in, as of the last, whatever it's been, 11 years or so, or 12 years, but missionaries and missionary friends and colleagues that are from various parts of the world, largely because of COVID. That was a major impact. And certainly, as you've noted, finances. But let me just kind of step back a second and just share a little bit about my own story, and then maybe we can draw from my own story something that may be a source of insight and encouragement to others. And so I just finished saying this in the meeting I had prior to our time together today, as I was interacting with a leader in Africa. And, I talked about how, I was a closet missionary while I was pastoring. I was a senior pastor of a local church here in Nova Scotia. And for about half of my service as senior pastor, I said I was a closet missionary. And what I meant by that is that I couldn't openly share the sense of calling to missionary service because I was in a pastorate position. And you typically don't say to your congregation, "Listen, I'm eventually going to be leaving you, but I don't know when and I don't know where," because that's not really something that will breed a sense of comfort or security. You don't know when your pastor is going to pull out on you. And so during that 4.5 years, I was silent on this missionary call. And then God released myself, my husband, and 2 of our 3 children to initially go into Costa Rica. We served there for a period of time, and then we went into Haiti. And so there's a lot that goes into that call. That's not just, you pick up, the phone and call your travel agent, and the next thing you know, you're in this other country. There's a lot that goes on in preparation prior to, picking up that phone and making that call to book your flights. And so it impacts your own relationship with the Lord. It impacts your marriage. It impacts your children, the children's education. It impacts your finances. It impacts your family relationships with extended family members. I mean, it ricochets into all areas of your life. And so after 4.5 years or so, or 5 years of preparing, identifying, it was actually predates the 4 and 5 years, but identifying this call to get to the mission field. And then you've left everything. You've left, in our case, our oldest child. You've left, financial support, and as far as, full-time salary positions. You've left the comforts of your being able to even come and go in safety. You're now a minority in a country that you don't look the same. You don't talk the same. You don't eat the same things. I mean, everything is completely different. And so here you are, and then all of a sudden, for circumstances beyond your control, you're ripped away from that.
Yes.
And my husband and I planned, after our children had grown on the mission field and had graduated from school in Haiti, to return to North America for post-secondary education. My husband and I planned on spending the rest of our lives working in Haiti on the mission field, and taking care of these orphans and street children. And so here we are, because of circumstances beyond our control, we're ripped away from that. And so I returned back to Nova Scotia, as I mentioned earlier, because of my husband's health, and then COVID kept me from being able to travel back to Haiti. I now literally, in the very area that I started, 25 years prior
Mm.
with a sense of calling to ministry. And for me, it felt as if I was put on some celestial snakes and ladders game, if you know that board game. And I felt,
Snakes and ladders?
yeah, snakes and ladders. Are you familiar with that?
I don't know. I know of chutes and ladders, but
No,
not
these are snakes
snakes
and
and ladders.
ladders. It's a board where you toss your dice and you move along the board, and you want to get to a ladder because the ladder allows you to move up closer to your end goal at the top of the board. And of course, as you roll the dice, you may also end up on a snake, and the snake will slide you right down lower. In some cases, if you hit one particular snake, he takes you right back to where you got to start go. And then your components, or your opponents, are moving up to get to that top end spot. And so for me, it felt like I was put on this celestial snakes and ladders board game, and somehow the dice was tossed, and I ended up on the snake that sent me back 25 years to where I was identifying a call to ministry. And here I was now on the global field, living global scene, serving in the dream and desire that I thought God and felt that God had given to myself and my husband. And now it's being ripped away from me. It wasn't a process. It wasn't something that was progressive. It was like, wow, literally the whole world, mine and the world, is turned upside down. And now I'm a missionary that can't even get to the mission field. And so talk about a form of, really, for me, it was spiritual trauma.
Mm.
It was spiritual trauma.
That's good that you identify that, because I was going to ask about your emotional state, because we are still human, right?
Yeah. It was in all of the challenges of being a female in the clergy ministry, which has its challenges, in dealing with, initially going into a country like Costa Rica, where again, the language is different. And, there are challenges even in that beautiful country of Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
Haiti, for me and for our family, was a whole other level of faith stretching.
Oh, yeah.
And so we weathered through that. We learned, by the grace of God, how to navigate a very difficult, challenging situation in living in Haiti. And in all of that, I never felt a faith crisis. I never felt a trauma in my faith. And a sense of I never lost that sense of calling on my life until this happened, until I was forced off the mission field. And I came back, and because of COVID, I couldn't connect with the community of believers. I couldn't go necessarily to the local church and be given that kind of support that was needed, not only for the situation of coming off the mission field and dealing with the cultural shock of being back into a country like Canada after coming out of a developing country like Haiti, but dealing with my husband's cancer. And so there was this enormous isolation that only fueled that trauma that was taking place of being ripped away from the life that my husband and I not only were living, but we wanted to live and intended to live for the rest of our lives. And so it was, to say that it made its impact would be an understatement. And it felt as if, again, that I had hit the wrong dice. Something got tossed on that dice and put me back where I started. And so I would say, God, first of all, are you there?
Right.
Are you even there? Which I couldn't even believe as a pastor and missionary was asking that.
Right.
Are you even there? And if you're there, do you even care? Why is my life being shredded when I thought you called me to serve you? And I was seeking to do so sacrificially. The level of emotional turmoil cannot be calculated or communicated. And so here we are now, we're, 2023, that was in 2019, 2020. I came off the mission field for my husband on February of 2020. I think it was like the 20th, 24th. And then I think it was the second week of March, COVID hit in my province. And again, everything shut down. And so from that date in February of 2020, we're now, March of 2023, and a lot has gone on in those months and years that have unfolded. My husband did pass away in March of last year. This past Friday, we celebrated and marked his the anniversary of his passing into the presence of the Lord on Friday.
I'm so
And
sorry.
thank you. I appreciate it. That God's grace is sufficient, and that's another story we can maybe talk another time. But so
Sure.
here we are now. I've been asking the Lord, are you there? If you're there, do you care? Do you see what's happening with my life? Does my life even matter? Is there really a call on my life? And how do I fulfill that call when I can't be in the mission field? I'm now a widow. That's impacted me personally, financially. It's impacted, the ministry and the financial resources available to be on the mission field, to live on the mission field, to serve on the mission field. And so there is this crisis of faith going on. And I would continue to go to the Lord over and over and over again with the honesty of my heart, of what I really was thinking and what I was really feeling. And when I didn't have the words to say, I just sat and cried, and my tears became the liquid words of prayer that I would place before the Lord. And so here we are. My husband died in March. I went back to Haiti in May, first time back since February 2020. I was able to sort through our home that was there, our ministry center. The ministry continues on to today, but it does look different. And so I went back and I worked through some of the turmoil of shutting down our lives, the life that Darren and I intended to live there. And I came back. I had to move from my house that we had with my husband because I could no longer live there alone. And I moved to another part of the province. Then September happens. And I received a phone call from a pastoral colleague and a friend that through the years of missions, haven't been able to be as active in communication as a result of, being in two different cultures, countries, communication challenges, what have you. And she invited me. She said, God has spoken to me to connect with you now that you are no longer on the mission field, and yet you clearly still have a missionary call. And I thought I would just connect with you. How are you doing? And I said, I'm a pastor without a congregation. I'm a missionary without a mission field. I'm a preacher without a pulpit. And I'm a wife without a husband. I don't know what God's doing. And so she said, can I just tell you why I believe God put you on my heart? And so she began to unfold what had happened here in Oxford, Nova Scotia. Oxford has 1,100 people as part of its population. It's basically one road.
Yeah.
They say, can anything good come out of Nazareth? When we could say, perhaps, could anything good come out of Oxford, Nova Scotia? But as a result of COVID, it really compelled her to put into action a vision that she had to provide and begin a digital church online. It was more than we tape our local services and we just put it online. It was much more than that. And so as of today, there are approximately 550,000 people engaged with the ministry. There is 6,700 that are actively members, as we would say. And it gets to a point where she could no longer continue to be effective and efficient in her role as a local pastor and pastor this large global growing church that is very multicultural. And so she had been praying for, God, what do I do? I need a certain gift set here, somebody who has a pastor's heart and pastoral experience, somebody who understands cross-cultural ministry, somebody that has, a measure of spiritual maturity, that have walked with you and can minister in different contexts and cultures and countries in this unique format. What do I do? And so God placed me in her heart in a way that she knew it was His voice. And so I share all of that to say this. I had the call to missionary service. I said yes to the Lord. I stepped in the missionary service. I was pulled off the mission field against my will to the point where it was so painful. It was traumatic for me. It gave me a faith crisis. And yet I still have this sense of calling to serve in missions, even though I'm not on the mission field. What are you doing, Lord, in this? Only now, in this short time frame, really, it's in some ways, certainly with my husband's help, it's felt like eternity. But really, it's been about 2 years for God to take me from this, what seemed like I hit a snake. He was actually putting me on a ladder, because here I'm pulled back, as they would say, in like what seemed like a setback was a setup.
Hmm.
And that would be the message I would give to my fellow missionaries. What seems like a setback, in my case, it seemed cruel, was the Lord actually setting me up to take me to multiple mission fields, but still be able to be, first and foremost, a mother to my three children who are grieving the loss of their father, to give me time to learn how do I navigate life by myself after being with someone that I loved and was loved by and served the Lord and loved the Lord with for over 30 years, and still be able to fulfill the call to missionary service. I would not have seen that. I would not have dreamed that. I would not even think to pray that. I did not see that on my radar whatsoever. I was in a state of saying, God, are you even real?
Hmm.
2 years later, just before my time with you, speaking to a significant leader in Africa, the continent of Africa. I'm not just
Hmm.
talking one country. I'm talking the continent that we are now looking at partnering with to support the work of the Lord in Africa, particularly with the local pastors. It's what I would call a circuit breaker. It is so God thought that it's not something I could have made up as part of the story of my life. God, I could have begged God, lead me on the mission field in Haiti. This is where I know some of the culture. I know the language. I can navigate in this world and this country of chaos and confusion. I know this mission field, but I would have missed out on being able to serve in places like Philippines. I'm ministering with atheists, Muslims, countries I could not go into as a white female from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I have conversations I could not have if I was sitting in that country. It would not be permitted or acceptable. It would be dangerous for me and perhaps the people that I would seek to serve. And yet God, in all of his grace and wisdom, took what felt as if it was a setback, a source of rejection, a source of abandonment, a means of tremendous trauma for me, and has blessed it and is taking it to the nations. It is staggering. So
It is. And I want to just, jump in here and say, as I'm listening to you, the level of personal suffering that you went through to get to this place. And, that's not like a hot topic in among Christians. Oh boy, am I getting to suffer this week? So that something amazing can happen. But yet it is through suffering that often God brings something new about. I'm not a fan of that exactly, but sort of. But after you're through it, you stand there and you're just amazed by it.
it's jaw dropping. I would go to the Lord on a number. I would say to him, it would be, various forms of the why.
Mm.
Give me understanding. What are you doing? It was not so much with an attitude of, Lord, you need to justify what you're doing in my life. Because when I said yes to ministry, I was actually saying yes to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And that yes doesn't change whether I'm in Haiti or I'm here in Canada or wherever he sends me. The yes to ministry and service is to the person of Jesus Christ, not to a position or particular country or culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go to the Lord. I said, Lord, help me understand. And there was a point in time very clearly spoke to me in a way that I could understand. And he said, daughter, cease asking me for understanding and ask me for perspective, because you never understand.
Mm.
And I shifted my prayers from Lord, why? Lord, give me understanding, to Lord, give me perspective. And then it was, Lord, give me purity of heart. Because if I'm going to suffer with this sorrow, because the grief was my husband and the loss of the mission field and the vision we had, there was grief after grief. God, if this is going to be a source of suffering, I want it to matter, make a difference. I want to steward this. And so what I felt that he gave to me in answer to my prayer for perspective is this. There are many of us followers of Christ, missionaries alike, where we want the power of resurrection in our lives. We
Mm-hmm.
want what we call the dunamis, the dynamite power of God in our
Yep.
lives.
Yep.
But many of us, particularly in North America, we don't want the Gethsemane, and we definitely don't want Calvary. We want the empty tomb to be the truth of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there is an example, there is a protocol, there is a process where there is pain that when placed in the hands of Christ becomes a gain. It becomes something that God pours himself into the pain with the purity of who he is so that he can reflect through us wherever he places us, whatever position he puts us in service. Mm-hmm. Missionary, pastors, Sunday school teachers, husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, grandparents. It doesn't matter the role. It matters this relationship with the Lord that he wants to reveal himself in and through. And so he would come to me when I would pray for perspective, and he would ask me in this very gentle way, because he's not an abusive God. He comes and he says, are you still willing? Are you still giving me your yes? Even though you're not in Haiti, even though you're not there with your husband, working with hands-on with these and holding these children, are you still willing to say yes to me, though you do not have understanding?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it was, at one point in time, it's even if it means that I will bring your husband home to be with me, will you still say yes? So my encouragement to the people of God, particularly those in missions, is to ask the Lord for perspective for your situation, for your sadness, for your grief, for the loneliness that comes with being a missionary who's not able to be on the mission field right now, to ask for the perspective, and in the pain, to give it to the Lord and say, Lord, make something out of it. Bring beauty out of the brokenness, because I bring it to you as a sacrifice. Coming off the mission field was a sacrifice. Losing my husband was a sacrifice for me and my family. Yeah. There is pain in that, but I want that pain to matter and make a difference so that the devil doesn't have the final say. COVID doesn't have the final say. Cancer doesn't have the final say. That the Lord Jesus Christ is able to say to me one day, well done, my good and faithful servant. I grieve with my fellow missionaries. There are some who are so broken that they are receiving in-house medical, psychological support. It's not a joke. The pain is very real. But I'm here to tell you from personal experience, God does take the pain and use it for good and for glory. He is faithful. If I had a choice, I wouldn't have left Haiti. But here I am now, able to serve in mission from my own home, for the most part, to the various continents of the world. That's God. That's God.
I so appreciate this word. I'm kind of in a bit of a season of suffering myself with just some complicated grief situations. And so I know I appreciate that, but I know the missionaries, those who are sidelined will, and I think at the same time, I really want to charge those who have been called and equipped for ministry that right now are not serving in, say, an institutional or denominational setting. I'm going to ask you to pray also for perspective, because there is work to be done wherever God plants your feet. That's what I used to say. I am here because God planted my feet here, wherever here is. And pray for perspective. Listen to the daring call of the Holy Spirit for what it is that you could be about. So this is kind of a calling to anybody who has an entrepreneurial spirit for Christ to really pray for that perspective as well. And, even if you are suffering at the moment, I liked what you said, Tonya, about, we like the empty tomb, but the journey there is sometimes not so pleasant. And I have always said that, and this was some of my doctoral work, was that the formula is that we want to be an authentic representation of Christ. And to get there, you have to say, I am your servant, Lord. You have that identity of being a servant of Christ, but then you also are heavily participating with Christ. And sometimes that is in the midst of suffering, but it is those two things together that help you to have that authentic representation of Christ, or the well done, my good and faithful servant kind of piece.
Well, just to add into some of what you said, which was so powerful, by the way, and just kind of brings to perspective even, some of what I've shared in a way that I'm sure will have impact. During the 2 years, because we were in lockdown here in this part of Canada, because we had COVID towards it hit the other provinces quicker and faster, more furious than where we are in the Atlantic coast. We were the last to receive COVID, and so we had one of the strictest restrictions, as I mentioned, and therefore we were one of the last to come out of COVID. And so we were in lockdown, and my husband and we came back from the mission field. The clothes I was wearing was borrowed. I mean, we had nothing. Everything, our home was in the mission field, and so we came back to nothing with a husband who's very sick. And so we ended up having this cabin in the woods, 5 kilometers off of a back road and down a dirt road. We called it Heaven's Hideaway, but it was only like 1,000 square feet or 1,100 square feet. I mean, it was teeny tiny, and we couldn't go anywhere. Other than Darren was allowed to travel to the city for his treatments, but other than that, we were not allowed to go anywhere, or we had a $2,000 fine that would be put on us. And so, what do you do? What do you do? And so here's what I did. Okay, if I can't serve on the mission field, if I'm not able to even get to a church to talk about what God's doing in Haiti, share about our work with orphans and with street children, what else can I do? And so what I ended up doing is I ended up starting a blog, started to write. It's a blog called Believers Boot Camp. I started a Facebook group called Trauma to Triumph. And I just started, and I joined a writers group that met online, which I still meet to this day. These years later, they helped navigate me through, some of those rough waters of cancer and COVID and coming off the mission field. And I just said, I'm going to do what I can do where I'm at, while I'm trying to gain perspective on what God's doing and where He's leading me. I'm going to make the best of the time that I have and be a wise steward. I can't just be a wise steward with the bigger picture if I'm not willing to be putting time and attention and effort and being a wise steward with what little I have. Even if it feels like I'm set back, it's a setback, I want to be faithful with where I'm at. And so for those 2 years, I was daily writing, things like how to handle your emotions before they mishandle you. I talked about, how to take trauma and turn it to triumph. The mercy message and the mercy of God saving someone like myself. I was not a nice sinner. I was a monster. And so what God did in my life in a supernatural encounter with Him, to use what I had with where I was, even though it wasn't where I wanted to be, and it wasn't a pleasant place for me. I said, I'm not going to waste this time. And God had believed, as His word says, if we're faithful with little, He will entrust us with much. And for me, I keep circling back again to the perspective. The fact of the matter is, yes, come off the mission field. Yes, a husband who's extremely sick and suffering. Yes, financial problems, because we lived off of about $5,000 in 18 months. We had nothing. We're wearing borrowed clothes, all of this is happening. And so, I could have got stuck there. Had I not turned to the Lord and said, give me perspective.
Well, I think that is a great place to end our conversation. And I would challenge our listeners that are maybe feeling sidelined for whatever reason in ministry, that you would begin praying for that perspective. I know that is something that I think that I'm going to add to my prayer list as well. Hey, thanks for listening. It is my deep desire and passion to champion issues of sustainability in ministry and for your life. So I'm here to help. I stepped back from pastoral ministry, and I feel called to help ministry leaders create and cultivate sustainability in their lives so that they can go the distance with God and whatever plans that God has for you. I would love to help. I would consider it an honor. And in all things, make sure you connect to these sustainability practices, so that you don't become the crabby pastor.